This week of the liturgical calendar, if we followed that, appropriately named, is the first Sunday after Christmas. First Sunday after Christmas. And I think I speak for most of us when I say that it's been a busy Christmas season and a busy year, and we're all a little bit exhausted from all of it. A young pastor in a Facebook group I'm in for pastors recently asked if it was okay to preach a sermon that he's preached before, again, at the same church. Most of the pastors in the group assured him that it was okay, as long as enough time had elapsed between the two sermons, and as long as it was a timely message that the church could benefit from. Again, one pastor in the group asked that, he said that he has one sermon that he preaches every single Christmas, another sermon that he preaches every single Easter, and another sermon that he preaches every single Mother's Day at his church, and no one in his church has ever noticed that he's constantly preaching the same messages over and over and over again. Another pastor in the group said, if it's good enough to preach once, it's good enough to preach twice. So since I was out of town this last week with the youth, and several days this past week, I'm taking the advice of many wise preachers and preaching a message that I preached about 4 years ago. One person in that pastor's group said, I hope nobody notices that I'm preaching the same messages over, and I thought, well, I hope my church does notice. I hope that they're paying attention and they notice. He used that illustration once before. I remember that one. And I remember these points that he made before. So I would take it as a huge compliment if after this sermon you come up to me and say, Pastor, I remember when you preached that once before. For the last few weeks, we've been talking about this idea that we can find Jesus everywhere. We can find Jesus everywhere. In the darkness, shining the light, as a servant on the cross, and even as a child in the manger. And of course, this is all in fulfillment of God's promises, because God always fulfills his promises. Whenever God sets out to do something, he does it. When God makes a covenant, he keeps his word. And we saw in Ecclesiastes earlier this year that whenever God creates a human heart, he puts eternity in our hearts, like a void that's formless and empty, so that we would long for him and long to be filled with his goodness. I love this old hymn. Sing it with me. There's within my heart a melody, Jesus whisper sweet and low. Fear not, I am with thee, peace be still, in all of life's ebb and flow. Jesus, 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 sweetest name I know, fills my every longing, keeps me singing as I go. Does Jesus fill your every longing? Or do you have some longings that are yet unfulfilled? And do you wonder if they'll ever be fulfilled? I mean, I do. I long for all of my kids to be perfectly holy, happy, and healthy. I long for my friends to have perfect marriages. I long for God's people, us, to always be perfectly united in faith and love, so that the whole world would see Jesus in us, believe the gospel, and be saved. But as of yet, all of these longings are unfulfilled, aren't they? My kids often do get sad and sick, and I've yet to see a perfect marriage, not even my own. It's close. Only because she's so perfect. And I'm reminded far too often just how divided God's people are. And the whole world is certainly not yet saved. Given that reality, we could become depressed and hopeless. We could declare that life is pointless, that there's so much brokenness in the world that we just want to curse God and die. Or we could become thankful that God is merciful and just and that he promised that he would right all of the wrongs and that he would wipe away every tear. So if you've been overwhelmed with burdens and longings, or even sometimes what feels like the hopelessness of our Christmas season, I hope that our scriptures today will remind you that God really does fill all of our longings in Jesus Christ.